Okay, welcome back. So today we're doing May-June 2021 question paper 11. Just one question which is not relevant to syllabus. That is question 19. So we start at question 30. Okay, so a country has adopted a fixed exchange rate system, but it's currently experiencing high unemployment and a deficit in their current account balance of payments. What combination would be most likely to improve both the level of unemployment and the current account balance of payments? Okay, so in order to improve the high unemployment, what we've got to try and do is we've got to try and move aggregate demand to the right so that we can increase our real GDP. And in order to improve the deficit on the current account of payments, we're going to want the exports to rise. Okay, so if we have a reduction in net spending by the government, that will move aggregate demand to the left, and therefore that would not be the correct option. Again, that's the same with C. AD would go left. Additional net spending by the government, that would be correct in terms of moving AD to the right. Revaluation of the currency would result in exports going down. Remember, revaluation is essentially in a fixed exchange rate, it's the same, or it operates the same as a appreciation on a floating exchange rate. So it would increase the price of exports, which would reduce the total amount of exports, and it would decrease the price of imports, which would increase the total imports. So therefore we're left with A. Increased net spending would move AD right. Devaluation of the currency would reduce the price of exports, which would increase our total exports, and it would increase the price of imports, which would reduce our total imports into the economy. Okay, a country depreciates its currency to improve its current account balance of payments. We can see they previously had a deficit and they are now in a surplus, which tells us that the exports have risen. What is the most likely cause of the movement from X to Y? Okay, so they've depreciated their currency, which we're told here. So we know that what that does is it makes the price of exports go down, right? So if the price of exports go down, we're going to be looking for a combined elasticity that is negative. And that is because we want the inverse relationship to happen. So price of exports go up if it is inverse. In other words, if the combined PED is a negative figure, then that will mean that our total revenue will rise for exports. So our total exports will go up because the quantity demanded for exports would rise significantly. Whereas if it is a positive figure like here in A or B, then once the price goes up, then the quantity demanded would also change in the same direction. So the quantity demanded would fall as well, and that would result in actually decreasing or increasing our deficit. So we want the one that's going to be the most elastic, which would be -2, because our demand would change by the most, and therefore our total export expenditure would increase significantly, and that would result in us moving from a deficit into a surplus, just like we can see in the diagram. Okay, Japan is suffering from deflation for 28. Which government policy would not help to overcome this problem? Okay, so what we're looking for here is for deflation, what would allow us to move AD to the right would be a way of overcoming the problem. So if we provide more innovation in technical industries, that would help, right? Because we'd be innovating, we'd be creating more products, we'd be making them more competitive, and the demand might increase. Lowering interest rates and increasing money supply is expansionary monetary policy designed to move AD to the right, Therefore, consumption and investment would increase, and it would help us to reduce the deflation. Increasing incentives for business startups by lowering profit taxes, that would be expansionary fiscal policy. AD would move right, and it would help us to reduce deflation. But if we encourage savings instead of consumption, that would not help us to increase our AD to the right, and therefore to fix the deflation. Remember that we want to encourage consumption because we want aggregate demand to move to the right in order to overcome the deflationary problems. Question 27. What would be likely to increase inflation in an economy? So increasing consumer saving, no, that would not have an effect. Remember, we're looking for AD to the right or AS to the left here. Increase in interest rates would be contractionary monetary policy. AD would go left. That would not increase inflation, it would decrease. Increase in labour productivity would move AS to the right, and therefore would help us to decrease inflation, not increase inflation. But if we have an increase in taxes on imports, what that may do is it may result in the cost of production for domestic firms rising, aggregate supply shifting to the left, and generating cost push inflation, which would mean that inflation would increase in the economy. Okay, question 26. Small country imports tractors. Government of this country decides to impose a quota on imported tractors. So first of all, the price of imported tractors here therefore would have no change. Remember that a quota is a limit. It's not a tax that's placed on the imports. Now, if there is a limit on the amount of tractors that can be imported, even though their price won't change, it's harder to get the imports, which means that consumption will change from imports into the domestic industry. It will make the domestic industry more competitive, and we would expect to see the domestic output of tractors rising as people are switching from imports to buying tractors on the domestic economy instead. Question 25, an AD and AS question. There's an increase in welfare payments. That's government spending, so AD would move right. Remember, government spending is a component of AD. Government improves industrial training. We would expect productivity, therefore, to increase, and we would expect AS to move right. So if we follow that along, AD moves right, we move here, AS moves right, and then we move on to point C. Okay, we've got four curves here, and we're asked to find out comparative advantages. So if we take a look at these, country W has a comparative advantage in producing cotton. So we need to calculate their opportunity cost, and if they're going to have a comparative advantage, they will have the lowest opportunity cost, right? So country W here, for one rice, they have to give up 0.4 cotton. But we can see here for country X that to make one rice they have to give up less cotton, right? So for country X they have to give up 0.22 cotton, which gives them a lower opportunity cost, and therefore tells us that A is incorrect. Country X has a comparative advantage in producing rice. Sorry, I was calculating rice there, but if we do it the other way around, so one cotton in this case would be 2.5 rice. One cotton for country X would be 4.5 rice. One cotton here would be 1.25 rice. and 1 cotton here would be 1 rice for the opportunity cost. So either way, we can see that they don't have the lowest opportunity cost of producing cotton in A. For B, we can see that they do have, country X has the comparative advantage in producing rice. If we just calculate the rice opportunity costs here, it will be 1 cotton for country Y. We've already calculated it for country W. 1 rice here would be 0.8 cotton. So we can see that the lowest opportunity cost of producing rice does lie with country X. Okay, therefore C and D have to be incorrect, but just to match them up, country Y has a comparative advantage in producing rice. Well, we already know country X has that advantage. Country Z has an absolute advantage, so total output in producing cotton. And we can see for cotton here, they make 20, but country Y actually has the absolute advantage in cotton because they can make 25. Okay, so correct answer is B once we do our calculations for the opportunity cost of each. Okay, 23. Table shows levels of countries' consumer price index between 2015 and 2019 compared with the previous year. In which year was there disinflation but not deflation? Okay, so deflation is when it's dropping here, right, and it's going to a negative figure. So there'd be deflation here in 2017 and 2016. Disinflation, remember, is when the price level is increasing, but it's increasing at a reduced rate. So disinflation is where the rate of inflation is dropping. So we can see between 2017 and 2018 here, the CPI figure increased by +3, so price level is rising. But between 2018 and 2019, price level only increased by 1. So that would actually be our disinflation, where we're still having an increase in the price level, so we're not having deflation, where it's going negative like 2016 and 2017, but what we are having is a decrease in the rate of inflation. The rate of inflation is decreasing from 3% in 2018 to 1% in 2019, but price level is still rising. Okay, why might a government wish to increase the value of its foreign exchange rate when the sum of the price elasticity of demand for imports and exports is greater than 1? Okay, so very simple. If they want to increase the value, what they're doing is they're appreciating. So the price of exports will go up, total exports will come down, price of imports will go down, total imports will go up, and we know that to be factually correct because we're told about the PED, combined PED values. So why would they do that essentially? Why would they want their total imports to go up and total exports to go down? It's not to attract tourists into a country. When we have an appreciation, it actually makes it more expensive for foreign tourists to come. That's correlated with the price of the exports. To improve the current account balance of payments in the long run, we can see that will actually decrease the current account balance of payments because we'll be increasing our imports and decreasing our exports. To increase inflation, well, we know that this is going to, if imports go up and exports go down, that is going to move aggregate demand to the left. So therefore, it would not increase inflation, it would actually decrease inflation. So the only logical option left is to make imported raw materials cheaper. Price of imports will reduce. If we're relying on those raw materials to be imported, we may appreciate the value of our currency in order to make them cheaper for domestic firms to receive. Okay, question 21. Two industries in a country are fishing and tourism. Foreign exchange rate of the country's currency fell, so we had a depreciation, opposite effect of what we said previously for the last question. So price of exports go down, total exports go up. Price of imports go up, total imports go down. So local people bought more imported goods because they were cheaper. We know that's wrong. Price of imports will rise. Price of fish sold in foreign markets became cheaper. That's true because the price of our exports drop. Volume of exports decreased. That's incorrect. Price of exports down. Total exports go up. Tourists to the country were discouraged by higher prices. That's also false. A depreciation of the currency, or when the price of our exports go down, it makes inbound tourism more attractive. It makes it cheaper for foreign tourists to visit our country. Question 20. Why might an unfavourable movement in a country's terms of trade benefit its economy? Remember what an unfavourable movement in terms of trade basically means. Terms of trade is index of export prices over index of import prices. So it means that the prices of imports are becoming more expensive relative to the price of exports. Now, why would we be looking for that to happen? So it would force inefficient firms out of business. Well, that's not going to benefit its economy, which we're told here. Increase the quantity of goods available for domestic consumption. Definitely not. If the price of imports become more expensive, it may restrict the quantity of goods available for domestic consumption, and that might be because, for example, it may become harder for us to import raw materials. Make domestically goods produced more expensive than imports. That is not true. We know that the price of exports will drop, so domestically produced goods will become more price competitive. And therefore the reason we might do it is to make our exports more competitive internationally. Why? Because the price of exports drop and the price of imports rise. So we may actually want an unfavourable or a deterioration on terms of trade, making our exports more competitive internationally than our imports because their price drops. Okay, subsidy question, total cost of the government. We've done these questions numerous times before. Remember, the total size of the subsidy is from the new supply curve up to where we hit the original, straight across down to the new price. Therefore, it would be RSPU is the total size of the subsidy, PRSU, and that is split between the benefit that the consumer receives through the lower price and then the benefit that the producer receives from the amount of the subsidy they're able to hold as essentially extra profit. Question 17. Diagram shows a market is currently in equilibrium. Government is considering the possible consequences of introducing a price control into this market. Which statement is not correct? Okay. Statement A. All consumers and some producers will lose if OP1 becomes the minimum price. Okay, that is true. All consumers will lose from being charged the higher price from where it is at the current market equilibrium, and some producers will lose because they won't be able to sell their excess level of supply. All consumers will be unaffected if OP1 becomes maximum price. That's true. Maximum price, remember, has to be placed below the equilibrium. So it will be ineffective if it is placed above equilibrium at OP1. Minimum price has to be placed above equilibrium to be effective. No producers will gain if OP2 becomes maximum price. That is true because that is the current market equilibrium price, so it wouldn't have an effect again. All producers will gain if OP3 becomes the maximum price. That statement is not correct. So if OP3 becomes maximum price, then the producers will not benefit because they are supplying less and they are receiving less for their product, and it creates the shortage down here where demand is higher because the price of the product drops, and the producers will not gain because they'll be receiving less money for their product. Okay, government provided additional free healthcare to its citizens. What happened as a result? Okay, very simply, they're increasing the supply, right? So the supply is going to increase. Now, what type of good is it? So supply reduces is wrong. It's not a public good because it is not non-excludable and non-rivalrous. Remember that education and healthcare are two goods which we refer to as private goods, but they are also merits. Okay, and they are the two main ones that are often brought up in the exam. So education and healthcare, they are both private goods, but also merit goods, because they generate external benefits, which means that they're underproduced and underconsumed. So we'll be increasing the supply of the merit goods if they provide this free healthcare. Okay, what would be classified by economists as an increase in transfer payments? Remember, transfer payments are non-productive means of payments, so they're things like pensions, child allowances, unemployment benefits, etc. Reallocation of spending is not an increase in transfer payments, it's moving spending from one area to another. Additional funding for government pensions, that is, we just explained that as a type of transfer payment. Extra spending on public sector infrastructure would not be an increase in transfer payments, it would be an increase in capital expenditure by the government. An increased salaries paid to the police would be an example of current expenditure by the government, not an increase in transfer payments as well. Okay, what is nationalisation? Very simple, we won't spend too long on this. Nationalisation is the transfer of a company from private ownership to government control. Remember, it's the opposite of privatisation. Privatisation is where it goes from government control to private ownership. Nationalisation, it goes from private ownership to government control. Okay, everything else is completely irrelevant. It is very simply just a definition question. Know the definition of nationalisation and therefore know the correct answer. Okay, question 13. Local government is deciding whether to increase car parking charges and to provide more lanes for bus use only. One official said the increase in car parking charges should cause more bus travel. Okay, so that first statement is correct. If we increase car parking charges, people will switch away to use buses. Second official said an increase in the frequency of bus services will cause the demand for bus travel to fall. That is incorrect. And very simply, how do you know? Because if you have an increase in bus services, based on what you know from your demand and supply diagrams, if there is an increase in the supply of those bus services, we would have a shift to the right in supply, and therefore we would have a fall in the price, and we would have an extension in demand or an increase in demand. So it would not cause the demand to fall. So therefore that second statement is incorrect. Okay, PES of a good is elastic, assuming that all the production is sold. Which combination correctly describes the link between the impact of a rise in price on the quantity supplied and the total revenue received? Okay, first of all, if it's elastic, there's going to be a greater percentage change than price for quantity supplied. Remember, the formula is the percentage change in QS divided by the percentage change in price. So if it's elastic, the quantity supplied will always change by more than price. If we are assuming that all their production is sold, therefore, that if they're able to release a higher supply to the market, their total revenue will definitely rise, as we know that they're going to sell everything they now supply to the market, and we know they're going to supply much more than the change in price. Okay, question 11. Prices of gold, silver and copper fell considerably in 2011 and again in 2015. The fall in prices in 2011 was said to be because miners increased production. Fall in prices in 2015 was because demand from China decreased. Okay, so we start at X. If they increase production, we only have one place to move here, right? We have to go to Q. And demand from China decreased, so therefore the demand curve will shift to the left, and we are left at OR. Right? So we go X, Q, OR, and we can see that A will be our correct answer there. Okay, question 10. Government introduces a subsidy for product X and the market price of X falls by 5%. Cross elasticity demand for product Y with respect to the price of product X is plus 0.4. What happened to the demand for product Y? Okay, so you need to know your formula again here. XED formula is percentage change in quantity demanded of good A divided by the percentage change in price of good B. So if we have the price of the other good, which is falling by 5%, we've essentially got X over 5% equals plus 0.4. Okay, now because it's a plus, that tells us they're substitutes. So if the price is dropping because they're a plus, this means that the quantity here has to also go down. Right? So increases can be taken out, and to get from what X divided by 5 to be 0.4 would have to be 2%, so it would have to decrease by 2%. Okay, question 9. A government wishes to encourage young adults to buy their first home by providing a subsidy to the builder. Which area on the diagram represents the size of the consumer surplus to those who buy a house with such a subsidy? Okay, now before the subsidy, remember consumer surplus is the area above the equilibrium price to the top of the demand curve. So before the subsidy, the consumer surplus would be this area V, right? Now after they shift the supply curve, the consumer surplus will now have an equilibrium price of $240,000, and therefore all of this additional area, which is now above the equilibrium price to the top of the demand curve, to include V, W, and Z, will all become part of the new consumer surplus. This is the gain in consumer surplus. W and Z is from the subsidy. So that will leave us with B as the correct answer there. Question 8. Why is the price elasticity of demand for a particular brand of coffee likely to be higher than the PED for coffee in general? Okay, coffee in general takes up a high proportion of consumer income. That does not explain it, right? And first of all, it doesn't. Coffee does not take up a high proportion of consumers' income unless you're earning a very small income. Consumers may be loyal to a particular brand of coffee. That would explain why it is inelastic. It would not explain why it is elastic. There are more substitutes for a particular brand of coffee than for coffee in general. Yeah. And total demand for coffee is higher than for one brand. That would not have an effect. So this question is to do with something that is not referenced as widely with PED. It is to do with the width of the definition of the market. Okay, and this is to say that as the market starts to get smaller, so for example, as we start to look at individual brands of coffee, the width of the definition of the market starts to get smaller, and we start to become more elastic as that happens. So that's because as we start to look at the smaller areas of the market, there starts to become more substitutes for this particular brand, whereas the substitutes for coffee might only be tea, for example. But the substitutes for a particular brand of coffee are many other different types of brands of coffee that are available on the market. Like the substitutes for Starbucks could be Luckin Coffee, could be Costa Coffee, could be Tim Hortons. But then if you say the substitutes for coffee in general might only be tea. So the smaller the width of the definition, the more elastic it generally becomes. The more closely you're looking at a particular product in a market, for example. Okay, what is necessary for demand for a good to be effective? So remember, effective demand is having the ability to pay for a product. We also have something that is known as notional demand, and that notional demand is just the willingness to buy a product, right? So notional is the willingness to buy, or the idea of purchasing the product. But effective demand means that we actually have to have the ability to follow through on wanting to buy it, or the ability to follow through on our notional demand to actually purchase it, and therefore it makes it effective demand. Okay, question 6. Unusual question here. When will it not be possible to use price as a rationing mechanism? Okay, so correct answer here would be C, when the demand for a good is perfectly inelastic. Now why? Because remember, rationing is a form that we use. If you think about it in terms of, if we show a maximum price diagram, for example, right? Rationing is something that we often have to use when we impose a maximum price, and that's because there is an extension in demand, right? So we need to ensure that people can actually get access to this good in a fair and equitable way, and we don't just have rich consumers who are purchasing it all. Because the demand extends and the supply contracts, we need to essentially ration it to make sure that we can limit people to how much they can purchase, so that everybody in our society can benefit from the lower prices. Whereas if the demand here is perfectly inelastic, then the quantity is never going to change for the demand, right? So this would be a perfectly inelastic demand curve. And if the quantity never changes, then irregardless of the price that's charged, the same amount is going to be demanded by consumers. And therefore, it will not be possible to ration or to limit or restrict how much they can purchase of the particular product, because the quantity will never change. Okay, so all of the others are ineffective here, and we will be able to still ration the product if we have those. The supply, remember, doesn't matter as much because the demand could still change. So we may have a situation there, for example, where we have an excess demand, even when the supply is at a fixed level, if the price drops considerably. And if they're an inferior good, if there are a number of close substitutes, that doesn't affect our ability to ration for the price mechanism to ration. Okay, question 5. What could explain a shift of an upward sloping supply curve to the right? So why would supply shift to the right is essentially what we're saying here. Indirect tax imposed for D would shift left. Increase in price of good would cause an extension in supply, not a shift. Increase in firms' unit labour costs would increase their cost of production and would shift supply to the left. Increase in the number of firms would therefore increase the supply to the market and would shift the supply curve to the right. What does the phrase ceteris paribus mean? Ceteris paribus means that everything else remains unchanged. It means that we assume, for example, that when we draw a demand diagram, that the price of the product here can go up or can go down and can change. But when we draw it, we're assuming that all of the other factors that will shift it, left or right, like incomes, etc., that they're all constant at the time that we're drawing it. Okay, once again, it is very simple, just a definition of ceteris paribus. You know the definition, you won't get the question wrong. Question 3. What type of good would be overconsumed because of information failure? That would be a demerit good. Okay, very simple. Demerit goods generate external costs. That is the reason why when the private sector provides them, they are overconsumed by consumers and they are overproduced by producers. Merit goods have the opposite effect. They are underconsumed and underproduced because of the external benefits that they generate. Inferior goods and public goods have nothing to do with the overconsumption. It is purely demerits. Okay, and question 2. What is the payment received for the use of capital? That would be interest. Profit is received for enterprise, another one of our factors of production. Rent is received for land, and wages are received for labour. Okay, they are the 4 payments to the factors of production. And finally, question 1. 2015, the Chinese economy grew at 6.9%, Indian economy at 7.6%, and US economy at 2.4%. Which comment contains 2 positive statements? Okay. Chinese economic growth exceeded US economic growth by 4.5. Can we test that? Is that correct? 6.9 minus 2.4. Yeah, gives us 4.5, but was 0.7 less than India. India was 7.6. So that is also correct. So that would be the correct answer. If we just check the others, Chinese economic growth is more than double of the US in 2015, but was disappointing compared to India. So that would make it normative because it's an opinion or subjective for the second statement. Economic growth in India was better than that of the US. Again, that's an opinion or a subjective statement. And economic growth in the US was too low in 2015. Again, that's an opinion, subjective, cannot be tested. Okay, and that's this paper done.